The laughter started before Soriel could reach her husband. She had been standing near the entrance of the Crimson Pavilion, adjusting the hem of her borrowed gown, when the sound cut through the noise of 500 gathered wolves like a blade drawn across glass. Not the polite laughter of courtly amusement. This was something crueler. Something designed to break a person in half while the world watched. Alpha King Halvard stood on the elevated platform at the center of the pavilion, his golden armor catching the firelight, his massive frame towering over the man kneeling at his feet. Her husband, Kalen. Soriel's blood turned to ice. Kalen knelt on the polished obsidian floor, his hands bound behind his back with iron chains that clinked softly as he breathed. His dark wool coat was torn at the shoulder, and a thin line of blood trailed from a cut above his left eye. But his posture, even on his knees, even in chains, was utterly still, utterly calm. As though the 500 wolves surrounding him were of no more concern than a passing breeze. That stillness should have warned them. It warned no one. "This," Halvard announced, his voice booming across the pavilion as he gestured down at Kalen with a goblet of wine, "is what the daughter of House Dravain chose over the bloodlines of Ashenmoor. A human, a mortal man with no wolf, no fangs, no power of any kind." The crowd rippled with laughter and murmured disdain. Halvard crouched down, bringing his face level with Kalen's. The Alpha King was enormous, his shoulders nearly twice the width of any normal man, his amber eyes burning with the predatory amusement of a wolf toying with something too small to be called prey. "Tell me, little husband," Halvard said softly, though the acoustics of the pavilion carried every syllable. "When your wife shifts beneath the moon, what do you do? Stand at the window and wait like a loyal dog? Or do you simply hide under the bed and pray she does not mistake you for a rabbit?" The laughter that followed was thunderous. Soriel pushed through the crowd, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her teeth. Bodies pressed against her from every side. Warriors in ceremonial leather, noble women draped in silk and contempt, all of them craning for a better view of the spectacle. "Let me through," she hissed, shoving past a cluster of Halvard's personal guard. "That is my husband." One of the guards glanced down at her and smirked. "We know who he is, Lady Dravain. The whole kingdom does. That is rather the point." On the platform, Halvard circled Kalen slowly, like a predator marking territory. "I gave your wife's family a choice. Unite House Dravain with my bloodline through marriage, or face the consequences of defiance. A simple offer. A generous one." He paused, letting the silence gather weight. "And what did the daughter of Dravain do? She refused me. She chose instead to bind herself to this fragile, fangless creature who cannot even protect her from a common hound, let alone an alpha." Halvard seized a fistful of Kalen's hair and wrenched his head back, exposing his throat to the crowd. In wolf culture, bearing another's throat was the ultimate display of dominance, a declaration that the person was so far beneath you they were not worth the effort of killing. "Look at him," Halvard commanded the assembly. "No wolf stirs behind those eyes. No beast answers my challenge. He is empty. He is nothing." The pavilion erupted in howls of approval. Soriel finally broke through the crowd and threw herself at the base of the platform. "Stop this!" Her voice cracked with fury and desperation. "Halvard, he has done nothing to you. He is not a wolf. He is not part of your world. Leave him alone." Halvard's gaze settled on her, and something dark flickered behind his amber eyes. Hunger. Possessiveness. The look of a man who had been refused something he believed was rightfully his and had never forgiven the insult. "On the contrary, Lady Dravain, he is very much part of my world now. He stands on my land, breathes my air, and holds a woman who belongs at my side." Halvard released Kalen's hair and descended the platform steps toward her. "I offered you a throne. I offered your dying house the protection of the most powerful pack in Ashenmoor. And you married this." He spat the last word like venom. Soriel felt the sting of 500 judging gazes. She knew what they saw: a foolish woman who had traded power and safety for love. A romantic idiot who had damned her bloodline because she could not resist a pair of quiet gray eyes and hands that touched her like she was sacred. She lifted her chin. I married a man worth more than every wolf in this room. Halvard stared at her for a long, dangerous moment. Then he smiled. Prove it. He snapped his fingers, and two of his warriors dragged Kalen to his feet. Tomorrow at dawn, your human husband will face Rendal in the proving ring. Halvard's smile widened. If he survives, I will release you both and never trouble House Dravain again. If he falls... His eyes raked over Soriel with undisguised appetite. You will take your rightful place as my queen, and his bones will be left for the crows. Rendal, Halvard's enforcer. A wolf who had killed 17 challengers in single combat without ever shifting past his half-form. A creature bred for violence the way roses were bred for beauty. No human could survive Rendal. No wolf under alpha rank had ever even wounded him. It was not a trial. It was an execution dressed in ceremony. Soriel's legs nearly gave out beneath her. She looked at Kalen, searching his face for fear, for anger, for anything that would match the terror clawing through her chest. Her husband looked back at her with those steady gray eyes, and in the fleeting moment before the guards hauled him away, he did something that made no sense at all. He smiled. Not a defeated smile. Not the brave front of a doomed man making peace with his fate. Something else entirely. Something that flickered behind his calm exterior like lightning hidden inside a cloud. Then the guards dragged him through the iron doors, and he was gone. Soriel stood alone on the pavilion floor, surrounded by wolves who looked at her with pity and felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Because in that smile, just for an instant, she had seen something she had never seen in 3 years of marriage. Her husband's eyes had not been gray. They had been gold. 3 years earlier, Soriel had found him bleeding in her garden. She had been gathering yarrow at the edge of her family's estate, the sprawling but decaying grounds that were all that remained of House Dravain's former glory. Once her bloodline had commanded respect across Ashenmoor, a noble wolf house with deep roots and fierce warriors. But the plague had swept through and taken her parents, her brothers, and nearly every fighting wolf in their service. What remained was a name, a manor falling to pieces, and Soriel herself, the last Dravain, 22 years old, with a wolf that could shift but no pack to run with. The man had been lying face down among the foxgloves, his clothes soaked with blood, one arm twisted at an angle that made her stomach lurch. He had no scent, or rather, his scent was wrong. Flat. Human. No wolf in Ashenmoor would have bothered saving a human stranger found bleeding in the dirt. Soriel had carried him inside anyway. She told herself it was because she was a healer by necessity, having learned herbcraft after the plague took everyone who might have taught her properly. She told herself it was because leaving a dying man in her garden would attract scavengers. She did not tell herself it was because of the way his hand had closed around hers when she tried to lift him, gentle, even in unconsciousness, as though some part of him recognized that the person touching him meant no harm, and wanted her to know he meant none either. His name was Kalen, and he remembered nothing. Not where he had come from. Not how he had been wounded. Not why a human man had been wandering alone through wolf territory. The only clues were a scar across his chest. Old, healed, shaped like something had clawed him from collarbone to hip, and a strange pendant around his neck. Dark metal, engraved with angular symbols Soriel did not recognize. She let him stay while he recovered. Days turned to weeks. Weeks turned to months. Kalen was unlike anyone she had ever known. He was quiet in the way that deep water is quiet, not empty, but full of things that moved beneath the surface. He repaired the manor's sagging roof without being asked. He learned which herbs she needed and had them sorted before she woke each morning. He read every book in her father's abandoned library and discussed them with her in the evenings, his gray eyes alight with intelligence that made her forget he was supposedly human. He never spoke of his past. When she asked, a shadow would cross his face, not evasion, but genuine confusion, as though his memories were locked behind a door he could not find. She fell in love with him the way a river finds the sea, gradually, inevitably, with a force that could not be redirected once it began. He showed it differently, not in grand declarations, but in small, steady acts of devotion. The wildflowers he left on her workbench, the way he positioned himself between her and the door whenever strangers came to trade. The night she woke screaming from a dream about the plague and found him sitting beside her bed, his hand on hers, murmuring reassurances until the terror passed. They married on the summer solstice, in the overgrown garden where she had found him. No guests, no ceremony beyond the words they spoke to each other beneath the stars. Ashenmoor's wolves did not approve. The reactions ranged from mockery to outrage, a noble bloodline diluted with mortal weakness. But Soriel ignored them. She had her husband, her herbs, and her quiet life. Let the packs sneer. She wanted nothing from them, but the packs wanted something from her. House Dravain's territory sat at the junction of three major trade routes. With no warriors to defend it, the land was vulnerable. Halvard, Alpha King of the Ashenmoor Dominion, demanded Soriel present herself at court. She refused. He sent 30 wolves to her border. And then, 3 nights ago, those wolves crossed. They came at midnight. They dragged Kaelin from their bed while Soriel screamed and clawed at them in wolf form. They beat her back with silver-tipped staffs and took her husband in chains, leaving a message burned into her bedroom floor. "Come to court, Lady Dravain. Your human pet will be waiting." Soriel had followed because she had no choice, and now she understood with terrible clarity what Halvard intended. Kaelin was not a hostage. He was bait. Halvard did not want to negotiate. He wanted Soriel herself, and the only way to have her was to destroy the man she had chosen, publicly and permanently. The proving ring at dawn. Rendell. A fight no human could win. That evening, she talked her way into 5 minutes in his cell. Kaelin sat on the stone bench, wrists raw from the chains, bruises darkening his jaw. "I will go to Halvard tonight," she said, kneeling before him. "I will offer him what he wants. He will release you." "No." The word was absolute, simply final. "Kaelin, you do not understand. Rendell has killed wolves 3 times your size. You are human." "I know what I am, Soriel." Something in his tone stopped her cold. His eyes were gray. They had always been gray. But in the dim torchlight, she could have sworn she saw something behind them, a depth that had no bottom, a stillness that was not calm but restraint. "Promise me something," he said. He pressed her hand to his chest over his heart. The heartbeat beneath her palm was slow, far too slow for a man facing death at sunrise. "Tomorrow, when the fight begins, do not interfere. No matter what you see, no matter what you think is happening. I cannot watch you die." "You will not." He said it with a certainty that made no sense. "Promise me, Soriel." She searched his face for the fear that should have been there, the resignation. She found none of it. She found only quiet stillness, and beneath it, something stirring, something vast. "I promise," she whispered. "When this is over," he said softly, "I will tell you everything. And I pray you will forgive me for the silence." Dawn came like a wound opening across the sky. The proving ring was carved into the bedrock beneath the crimson pavilion, a circular pit 30 paces wide, walled with rough-hewn stone that rose 10 feet on every side. The seats above it climbed in tiered rows, and every one was filled. Word had spread through the night. The Alpha King's human prisoner would fight Rendell at first light. No one wanted to miss it. Halvard sat in the royal gallery, draped in a cloak of black fur. He had positioned Soriel directly to his left. "You look tired, Lady Dravain. You could end this now. One word from you. Accept my offer, and the human walks free. His name is Kalen. His name is irrelevant. He will be dead within the hour." A horn sounded from below. The eastern gate groaned open, and Rendell stepped into the dawnlight. The crowd's roar was immediate. 7 feet of controlled violence, his scalp covered in ritual scars marking each of his 17 kills. Then the western gate opened. Kalen walked out barefoot, wearing only torn trousers, no weapons, no armor. The crowd's roar faltered into murmurs of disbelief. Several wolves actually laughed. Kalen walked to the center of the ring. He did not look up at the crowd. He simply stood, arms loose at his sides, bare feet planted in the sand. And he waited. The ceremonial drum sounded 3 times. The fight began. Rendell launched himself across the ring with explosive speed, covering the distance in 2 strides. His right fist, already thickening with the partial shift, swung in an arc that should have caved in Kalen's skull. It connected with nothing. Kalen was 2 feet to the left, his posture unchanged, his expression unchanged, as though he had simply decided to be somewhere else. Rendell stumbled, thrown off balance by the miss. He recovered fast, spinning with a backhand that whistled through the air with killing force. Again, Kalen was not there. A ripple of confused silence spread through the crowd. Soriel leaned forward, heart slamming against her ribs. She had seen Kalen move, but her eyes could not process it. It was not dodging, not reflexes, something else. Something that made the air around him shimmer like heat rising from summer stone. Rendell's wolf surged. His body expanded, muscles splitting through skin as he entered his half-form. Claws erupted from his fingertips, his jaw distended, fangs pushing through gums. He was enormous, terrifying. He charged with both arms sweeping in a devastating cross pattern that left no room for evasion. Kalen caught his right wrist. The proving ring went silent. Not deflected, not dodged. Caught. One bare human hand wrapped around the wrist of a half-shifted wolf warrior, stopping the blow dead as though Rendell had swung into a stone wall. Rendell wrenched backward, trying to free himself, and could not. The human's grip did not budge, did not tremble. From her seat, Soriel watched, and the word that rose unbidden to her mind was not impossible. It was familiar. She had seen this stillness every day of their marriage, the quiet that was not absence but containment, the calm that was not weakness but control so absolute it looked like peace. What she had mistaken for gentleness had been restraint. What she had mistaken for vulnerability had been a leash. Then Kalen's eyes changed. The gray deepened like storm clouds thickening before they broke. And at the center of each iris, a ring of gold ignited. Not amber, like a wolf's eyes. Gold. Pure, molten, ancient gold. Because every wolf alive knew the difference between amber and gold. Amber was the color of an alpha. Gold was the color of something older, something that existed before the packs, before the bloodlines, before the wolves of Ashenmoor had carved their petty kingdoms from the wild. Gold was the color of a Lycan. Rendell's face went pale. His half-shift dissolved, wolf retreating so fast it left him gasping. He hit the sand on his back, scrambling away, and pressed his forehead to the ground. The most lethal warrior in Ashenmoor submitting. And the sound from his throat was not a growl. It was a whimper. The proving ring erupted in chaos. Beside Soriel, Halvard had gone completely still. The wine goblet in his hand cracked, red liquid streaming through his fingers like blood. "That is not possible," he whispered. "The Lycans are extinct." But Kalen was no longer looking at Rendell. He was looking up, past the screaming wolves, past the warriors reaching for weapons they did not understand the need for. He was looking at Soriel, and the transformation came like something unfolding, as though the man she had married had been an envelope, and the letter inside was finally being read. The form that rose was twice the size of the largest alpha in Ashenmoor. Fur the color of a winter storm, dark silver streaked with veins of black. And from its throat came not a howl but a roar, the kind of sound that lived in the marrow of every wolf's bones, the kind of sound that said, with perfect and terrifying clarity, I was here before you, I will be here after you, and you have made a very grave mistake. Every wolf in the proving ring dropped. 500 wolves pressed their faces to stone, driven down by an authority so ancient their bodies obeyed before their minds could process it. The forced submission of an entire pack by a single presence. Only 2 people remained standing. Soriel, because the power flowed around her like a river parting for a stone, leaving her untouched, and Halvard, because the Alpha King was fighting it. His body shook with the effort. Veins stood out on his neck and temples. His wolf raged against a force it could not comprehend. But his knees were bending. Inch by inch, the Alpha King of Ashenmoor was driven to the ground by the gaze of the man he had called empty, the man he had called nothing. Halvard's knees hit stone with a crack that echoed through the silent pavilion. And Soriel, still standing, still reeling from the revelation that had shattered every assumption she had ever made about the quiet man who left wildflowers on her workbench, whispered a single word. Kaelin. The Lycan's gaze shifted to her, and in those ancient blazing eyes she saw it. The same devotion. The same love that had held her hand through nightmares and never once asked for anything in return. Her husband was still in there. She just had not known what else was in there with him. The silence lasted exactly 7 heartbeats. Soriel counted them. Then Halvard moved. He wrenched himself upright with a snarl that tore the air, blood streaming from his nose. The effort of resisting the compulsion had burst the vessels in his face. Wolfsbane nets, silver chains, bring them now! 6 warriors emerged carrying lengths of silver-laced iron, each link inscribed with binding runes that glowed faintly blue. These were relics, chains forged in an age when Lycan still walked the earth, designed specifically to contain creatures no wolf could subdue. Halvard should not have possessed them. Their existence meant he had known. Maybe not about Kaelin specifically, but about Lycans. He had prepared for this possibility, which meant the humiliation, the proving ring, the public spectacle. It had never been about Soriel at all. It had been a trap. Kaelin! Soriel screamed, lunging for the gallery railing. 2 of Halvard's personal guards seized her arms from behind. She thrashed, biting at the fingers covering her mouth, her wolf surging to the surface with a fury that sent silver-gray fur rippling across her skin. But a silver collar, thin, etched with suppression sigils, clicked around her throat before she could complete the shift. Her wolf slammed against the barrier and recoiled, howling inside her skull. The place where her wolf lived went suddenly, horribly quiet. Below, the 6 warriors surrounded the Lycan. They moved in practiced formation, spreading the silver chains in a web designed to entangle rather than restrain. Kaelin's eyes found Soriel in the gallery. He saw the collar. He saw the guards holding her. He saw the fear on her face. And he made a choice. Soriel watched it happen in real time, the moment her husband decided not to fight. The tension drained from his massive frame. The blazing gold dimmed, deliberately banked. His form shrank until the man she had married stood barefoot in the sand once more. The chains hit him from 6 directions. He was not surrendering because he was defeated. He was surrendering because the alternative meant unleashing the full force of a Lycan in a pavilion that contained the woman he loved. They would use her against him. They were already using her against him. And Kaelin, who had hidden what he was for 3 years rather than let his nature endanger her world, would sooner let them wrap him in chains of agony than risk a single one of his claws landing near Soriel. His love was the leash. Halvard had found the one weapon that could restrain a Lycan king. Halvard descended, composure reassembling with each stride. He stopped before Kaelin, wrapped in silver that smoked against his skin. The Lycans are not extinct after all. I suspected something when my scouts found an energy signature near Dravain's estate. A residual pulse that matched no known wolf frequency. It took months to trace it to the source. A harmless human with a talent for roof repair. He crouched down. Does your wife know what you truly are? Kaelin's gaze found Soriel above. The look in his eyes was not rage or defiance. It was apology. Take him to the deep cells beneath the mountain. Silver-lined, rune-sealed, no light. Halvard turned to address the assembly. What you have witnessed today is a threat to every wolf in Ashenmoor. A Lycan, a creature we believed eradicated, has been hiding among us. This is not a love story. This is an infiltration. He was rewriting the narrative in real time, transforming Kaelin from a mocked prisoner into an existential threat, and Soriel from a stubborn romantic into a potential traitor. Soriel was dragged to the eastern tower in a haze of grief and fury. The guards deposited her in a chamber that was luxurious by any standard. Thick carpets, a canopied bed, and windows overlooking the valley below. A gilded cage. The door locked behind her with the sound of iron teeth biting into stone. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass and stared at the mountain beneath which her husband was being buried alive in silver and darkness. He had hidden what he was. Every day, every moment, every soft word and tender touch had been built on a foundation of silence. But even as the anger rose, she could not sustain it, because she kept seeing the same image. Kaelin, with the power to level the entire pavilion, choosing to kneel in burning chains rather than risk harming her. That was not the action of a deceiver. That was the action of a man who loved her more than he loved his own freedom. Soriel pressed her palm flat against the glass, as if she could push through it, through the stone, through the mountain itself, to reach the place where they were keeping him. I will find you, she whispered. Whatever you are, whoever you are still mine, and I will find you. Deep beneath the mountain, in a cell where no light had ever reached, Kaelin's eyes burned gold. 9 days passed. 9 days of silk sheets and silver collars, of trays delivered through a slot in the door, of guards who would not meet her eyes, of silence so complete, Soriel began talking to herself just to hear a voice. Halvard visited on the 3rd day, dressed in council robes instead of armor. The council has convened regarding the Lycan situation. Their recommendation is execution. Before the new moon. 8 days. He let the timeline settle over her like a shroud. Unless you dissolve your mating bond, denounce him publicly, and accept my claim, House Dravain will be restored under my protection. You call this mercy? Threatening to murder my husband unless I crawl into your bed? Your husband is a creature that could destroy every wolf in Ashenmoor if those chains ever fail. I am offering the only path that ends with him alive, even if that life is spent in captivity. After he left, Soriel did not cry. She had moved past crying 3 days ago into a place that was harder and colder and far more dangerous. She began to plan. The suppression collar blocked her wolf, but it did not block her mind. She cataloged every detail: guard shifts, drafts suggesting hidden passages, the rhythmic pulse of the collar's sigils. On the 7th day, she found an ally. The servant who delivered her evening meal was new, a girl barely past her shifting age, with copper-brown hair and nervous hands. She set the tray down with exaggerated care, as though afraid the plates might shatter at the sound of her thoughts. Thank you, Soriel said, the first words she had spoken to another person in days. The girl flinched at being addressed. Then, in a voice barely above a breath, she whispered, "The wolves are talking, my lady." Her name was Nerida. She had served in House Dravain's kitchen before the plague. Soriel's mother had been kind to her. "They say the prisoner is not human. They say he broke Rendal without shifting. They say the Alpha King is afraid." Nerida's whisper grew urgent. "Halvard's orders do not reach the kitchen staff or the stable hands or the wolves who patrol the outer walls at night. The story is spreading. Not the version the Alpha King tells. The true one. The true version, that Halvard had dragged an innocent man from his bed, humiliated him, and sentenced him to death for the crime of being loved by a woman Halvard wanted for himself. And when that innocent man turned out to be something Halvard could not control, the Alpha King had imprisoned him in darkness and lied to his people about the reason. And there was more. Stranger things. The wolves on the northern watch said there were shapes in the mountains, figures larger than any alpha, moving in pairs and threes at night. The sentries who had seen them all said the same thing. The figures had golden eyes. 11 of them. Not attacking. Not negotiating. Waiting. The way soldiers wait for a command. The way a guard waits for its king. Kalen was not the last of his kind. He had never been the last. Nerida also brought a scrap of cloth found pressed into the outer wall's mortar overnight. Left during the darkness. No one saw who placed it. Burned into the fabric were angular symbols, identical to the engravings on Kalen's pendant, the one Halvard's wolves had confiscated when they dragged him from their bed. Beneath the symbols, in letters small enough to be mistaken for a stain, a single word: soon. "I need 3 things," Soriel said. "A map of the lower cells, a way to fracture the sigils on this collar, and a route that bypasses the upper guards." Nerida returned the next night with everything. The cell was 40 feet below the foundation, accessible through a stairwell behind the armory, 4 guards at the top, 2 at the bottom. But the drainage tunnel from the kitchens ran beneath the armory level and connected to the lower corridor directly, bypassing the upper guards entirely. The collar could be cracked by striking its hinge pin during the fraction of a second gap between sigil pulses, and the chains were failing. Runes cracking, the runesmith frightened, reinscribing at double the normal rate. Worse, the execution had been moved forward. 3 days. "Then we move tomorrow night, no matter what." Alone in the dark, she assembled the pieces, the amnesia, the scar, the pendant. 11 figures circling like soldiers awaiting a command. Kalen was not just a Lycan, he was the Lycan King. And his amnesia had been no accident. Someone had tried to assassinate him, stripped his memories, and left him to die. The most powerful being in the known world had spent 3 years happily tending her garden. And the question that burned deeper than the collar: when the memories returned, would he still choose the healer who pulled him from the dirt? It did not matter. Tonight, the only thing that mattered was freeing him alive. The servants' passage smelled of damp stone and decades of neglect. Soriel moved through it in bare feet, her shoes left behind to eliminate sound. Nerida walked ahead, a single candle shielded in her cupped palm. They had waited until the second hour past midnight. The guard shift had settled. The castle above them slept. The suppression collar still burned against Soriel's throat. Nerida's contact in the laundry, a broad-shouldered woman named Hesta, had examined the collar that afternoon during a staged delivery of fresh linens. She had studied the hinge pin, counted the sigil pulses, and produced a thin iron awl. "Wait for the glow to fade between cycles. Strike once, hard." The awl now sat in Soriel's clenched fist, its point pressing into her palm like a promise. But not yet. The collar had to stay on until she was closer to Kalen. If her wolf suddenly reappeared on the castle's sensory grid, every guard would know. The drainage tunnel was narrow, foul, and blissfully unguarded. Soriel crawled through on hands and knees, the cold muck soaking her dress. The tunnel angled downward, taking them beneath the main keep and past the armory level to the lower corridor. Narita stopped at the stairwell threshold. The presence down there. My wolf is fighting me. I cannot go further. You have done more than enough. If I am not at the western wall by dawn, take the tunnel out and do not look back. Soriel descended alone. The stairwell opened into a short corridor lit by a single guttering torch. Two guards sat at the far end, flanking the cell door, their posture slack from hours in the presence of something that pressed against their instincts like a hand pressing against a bruise. She set the candle down and gripped the awl. The collar pulsed. Bright, bright, bright. And then, there. A flicker. A fraction of a second where the glow dimmed between cycles. She drove the awl into the hinge pin. The collar cracked. A single fracture line running through the primary sigil, splitting the suppression field like a seam tearing open. Her wolf surged through the gap with a force that nearly knocked her off her feet. She shifted, silver gray, lean, built for speed, her fur the color of birch bark in winter light. The two guards had approximately 1 second to register the sound before she hit them both. Jaw to temple, shoulder to chest. They would wake with headaches. They would live. She took the keys from the first guard's belt and worked the cell locks with shaking hands. The cell beyond was silver-lined, rune-sealed, no light. But there was light now, pouring from the figure seated against the far wall. Kaelin sat cross-legged on bare stone, wrapped in silver chains that glowed so brightly they illuminated the entire chamber. The runes inscribed on every link were fractured. Not hairline cracks anymore, but deep fissures that spread like roots through soil. He was not being contained by the chains. The chains were barely surviving him. Kaelin, she whispered. His eyes opened. Gold. Blazing. Absolute gold. But the expression in them was entirely the man she had married. Relief and love and a sorrow so deep it seemed to have no floor. You should not be here, he said, voice scraped raw by 9 days of silence. Soriel, if they find you, then they find me. She crossed the cell and knelt, her hands finding the chains. The silver burned her fingers on contact, but she did not pull away. I am not leaving this cell without you. She examined the central binding rune, the crack wide enough to fit a fingernail into. If I break this anchor rune, will the rest collapse? How do you know about anchor runes? I am a healer. Binding runes and healing sigils share the same foundational grammar. The anchor point is always the load-bearing structure. She met his eyes. Will it collapse? A pause. Then he smiled. That same quiet, steady smile she had fallen in love with. Yes, it will collapse. She drove a stone shard into the fracture with the heel of her palm. The chains exploded inward, dissolving into metallic dust that rained to the floor like ash. Kaelin gasped, his body arching as the suppression field released its grip. He sagged forward, and Soriel caught him, his forehead pressing into the curve of her neck. There are things I need to tell you, he said against her skin. Things that will change how you see me. I know what you are. I worked it out in the tower. Lycan. Almost certainly their king, based on the 11 subjects circling these mountains waiting for your signal. The amnesia was not natural. Someone tried to kill you. The scar on your chest is the evidence. A choked sound. Half laugh, half sob. You always were the most observant person I have ever known. And you were always the worst liar. No human has a resting heartbeat of 42 beats per minute, Kaelin. I am a healer. I noticed on our wedding night. Then why did you never say anything? Because whatever you were hiding, you were still the man who held my hand through nightmares. The rest could wait until you were ready. She cupped his face in her burned hands. Are you ready now? He pressed his lips to her scorched palm. My name before I lost my memory was Kaelin Veilrath. I am the sovereign of the Lycan territories beyond the northern mountains. My own brother, Mordain, drove a cursed blade through my chest, shattered my memory, and left me to die in Wolflands. His eyes held hers. But the man who fell in love with you in that garden, he was not a mask. He was not a version of me created by the amnesia. He is who I am. The memories of my past do not change that. They do not change us. The question she had tortured herself with for 9 days, answered in a single breath. She kissed him, fierce and desperate, tasting of salt and silver dust. When they broke apart, alarms were ringing above. "Call them," she said, dropping the broken collar on the cell floor. The sound from his throat was something beneath a howl, a frequency that passed through stone and earth as though they were not there. From the mountains, 11 voices answered. The Lycans did not approach from the mountain passes. The first one cleared the northern wall in a single bound that carried it 40 feet through the air, landing in the main courtyard with an impact that cracked the flagstones. Rust-red fur, enormous golden eyes sweeping the courtyard with predatory efficiency. Guards dropped involuntarily to their knees. More Lycans cleared the eastern and western walls, each securing a section of the fortress without a single claw raised in violence. The compulsion radiating from 11 Lycan bodies was a force as irresistible as gravity. Halvard's wolves were warriors, trained, hardened, and loyal. None of that mattered. Kalen walked through the chaos with Soriel at his side, his hand holding hers. He had not shifted. He did not need to. His presence alone bent the castle around him, guards stepping aside, doors opening, torches brightening as though the fire itself recognized something in him. They found Halvard in the throne room with approximately 40 warriors forming a defensive semicircle before the dais. Commander Dragon and Rendell flanked the Alpha King, who stood in full battle shift, half-form towering, amber eyes blazing with the defiance of a cornered predator. "So the pet has slipped its chains," Halvard growled. "I want to give you the opportunity to surrender," Kalen said, his voice quiet, conversational. "Before anyone in this room is hurt." Halvard laughed. It was a sharp, ugly sound, stripped of any pretense of royal composure. "Surrender? To what? A creature playing dress-up as a man? You hid in a healer's cottage, mending fences and planting herbs. You are no king. You are a coward who ran from his own kind and hid behind a wolf woman's skirts." Something flickered across Kalen's face. Not anger. Soriel knew his anger by now, and this was not it. This was closer to sadness, the expression of someone watching another person build their own scaffold without realizing it. "I did not run," Kalen said evenly. "I was betrayed, wounded, and left for dead. My memory was taken from me. I did not choose to forget what I was. But you chose to stay forgotten." Halvard's lips peeled back from his fangs. "Even when the memories started to return, you chose that pathetic little life, chose to be nothing." Soriel felt Kalen's hand tighten around hers, not with rage, with recognition. Because Halvard was not entirely wrong. Kalen had loved their quiet life, the garden, the herbs, the simplicity of days measured in honest labors. He had chosen peace over power every single morning. Waking beside her, reaching for her hand, stepping into a life that asked nothing of him but presence and kindness. And Halvard saw that as weakness. "You are right about one thing," Kalen said. "I would rather mend fences than rule. I would rather spend my life in a cottage with the woman I love than sit on any throne." He paused. "But you made that impossible, Halvard. You came to my home. You dragged me from my bed. You put your hands on my wife." His voice dropped, the harmonic undertone making the floor vibrate. "You put a suppression collar on my mate. You caged her wolf. You treated her like property to be claimed. And for that, I will not forgive you. Not now. Not ever." The air grew heavy, dense, saturated with a presence that made every wolf in the semicircle suddenly, desperately aware they were standing in the path of something they could not survive. Halvard's response: "Dragon, kill the woman, now." Dragon lunged toward Soriel with the speed of a trained killer, made it 4 steps. Kalen spoke a single word in a language Soriel did not recognize. Ancient, guttural, carrying a weight that compressed the air. Dragon's body seized mid-stride. Every muscle locked, frozen in place like a sculpture of violence interrupted. A Lycan sovereign's ability to speak directly to the wolf inside another being and silence it completely. "Every wolf in this room can be rendered exactly as he is," Kalen said. "Or they can lay down their weapons and walk out unharmed. The choice is theirs." The semicircle dissolved in 30 seconds. Rendal was the first to leave. He did not look back. Halvard stood alone on the dais. His half-shift receded, not voluntarily, but inevitably, his wolf retreating from the overwhelming presence that filled the room. He shrank, diminished, until the Alpha King of Ashenmoor stood in human form, his golden armor suddenly too large for the man wearing it. "This is not over," Halvard whispered. "Yes," Kalen said quietly. "It is." The rust-red Lycan stepped forward and placed a massive paw on Halvard's shoulder, pressing him to his knees with effortless, almost casual force. Halvard, Alpha King of Ashenmoor, knelt on his own throne room floor for the second time before the man he had called nothing, and this time there was no one left to watch. 1 hour of fragile peace. Then the world cracked open again. The castle was secured. Halvard was confined to the deep cells he had built for Kalen, an irony that Soriel suspected was not accidental. Kalen told her the rest in Halvard's own chambers, sitting on the edge of the absurdly large bed, his hand resting on hers. His brother, Mordain, had usurped the Lycan throne. The resistance leader Tarvek, the rust-red Lycan, had been searching for Kalen while fighting to keep Mordain from consolidating total power. And now, with the Proving Rings revelation spreading across every border by wolf traders and merchant caravans, Mordain was mobilizing 3,000 soldiers, 2 days away. Not Lycans, conscript mercenaries and turned humans who served out of terror rather than loyalty. But 3,000 bodies could overwhelm 11 Lycans through sheer mass, especially with the right weapons. That was the worst revelation. "Mordain's cursed blade, the one that nearly killed me," Kalen said. "It was forged from voidstone, an ore that exists in only one place, a mine beneath the Ashenmoor Mountains. This territory." "Halvard supplied the blade," Soriel breathed. "Halvard provided the weapon. In exchange, Mordain agreed to a non-aggression pact. With me dead and Mordain on the throne, Halvard would never face a Lycan challenge to his dominance." The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Every act of cruelty, every word about Kalen being worthless, uttered by a man who had actively participated in trying to kill him. "I want to go to the cells," Soriel said, her voice flat and hard. "Soriel, I want to look him in the face and ask him how long he knew. How long he sat across from me in that gallery, watching my husband bleed in his proving ring, knowing he had helped put the scar on his chest." Kalen studied her face. Whatever he saw there, he did not argue. "Tarvek will accompany you," he said. "I need to meet with the pack leaders who remained loyal to Halvard's court. If we are going to survive Mordain, we need their wolves fighting with us, not against us." Soriel stood, then turned back. "The pack leaders will not follow you because you are a Lycan. That terrifies them. They will follow you because of who you are when you are not a Lycan. The man who asks before he acts." She touched his face. "Lead with that." He caught her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles. "What did I do to deserve you? You bled in my foxgloves. It was very dramatic." The ghost of a smile, the first real one she had seen since the proving ring, and she carried it with her like a lantern as she descended into the dark. Soriel descended to the cells and confronted Halvard directly. The deep cells stripped everything away. The golden armor, the royal posture, the carefully maintained aura of authority. What remained was a man sitting on cold stone, his amber eyes dull with the exhaustion of someone whose world had inverted overnight. "The Void Stone," she said. No preamble. Just the word, laid between them like a blade on a table. "You supplied the ore to Mordain. You helped forge the weapon that nearly killed my husband. And when he survived, broken and amnesiac, you found him living in my home and decided to use him again. This time as bait to draw out any remaining Lycan presence." Halvard said nothing, but the silence was confirmation enough. "Mordain is coming, 3,000 soldiers. When he arrives, he will not distinguish between your wolves and Kaelin's Lycans. He will slaughter everything in Ashenmoor. Your people, Halvard. The wolves who served you faithfully. Mordain will butcher them all, and it will be because of what you set in motion." Halvard's jaw worked. "What do you want?" "The Voidstone mine, its location, its defenses, and how much ore remains." He stared at her for a long time, self-preservation warring with pride. Then he gave her the location. Greytooth Mountain, 3 miles north, accessible through a single shaft. She rose to her feet. At the door, she paused. "You called my husband nothing. You looked at the most powerful being you had ever encountered and saw weakness because he chose kindness over domination. That is not his failure of character, Halvard. It is yours." Then she brokered the alliance that should not have existed. 300 of Halvard's wolves pledged to fight alongside 11 Lycans. Tarvek's scouts collapsed the Voidstone mine overnight. 300 tons of granite sealing the only shaft. In the council chamber, 7 Wolfpack leaders sat paralyzed by fear. Soriel walked to the table, placed both hands flat on its surface and addressed them directly. 3,000 enemy soldiers are 2 days from this castle. They are led by a Lycan who murdered his own brother for power, and who will slaughter every wolf in Ashenmoor to finish the job. You can spend the next 2 days negotiating terms with the only force capable of protecting you, or debating whether that force is more frightening than the one coming to kill your families. She straightened. "I recommend the former. It is a better use of time." The eldest pack leader, a weathered woman with iron-gray hair who had survived 6 alpha successions, leaned back and almost smiled. "House Dravain speaks plainly. I had forgotten that about your line." Negotiations concluded in under an hour. Mordain's army arrived at dawn on the second day. They came through the eastern pass in a column that stretched back beyond the horizon. Wolf mercenaries in mismatched armor, turned humans with the hollow eyes of those who served out of terror rather than conviction. And at their head, riding a horse the color of bleached bone, a figure whose resemblance to Kaelin was unmistakable. The same dark hair, the same angular features, the same quiet stillness. But where Kaelin's stillness was the calm of deep water, Mordain's was the stillness of a held breath before a scream. There was nothing peaceful in it, nothing restful. It was the stillness of a predator frozen at the moment before the strike, sustained indefinitely through sheer corrosive will. His eyes were gold, like Kaelin's, but the gold was wrong, darker, muddied, as though something had tarnished the metal from within. "Brother," Mordain called from below the wall. "You look well for a dead man." He withdrew a sword from a long case of dark wood, voidstone. The blade seemed to drink the morning light. "I kept the original. I thought it might be poetic to finish the work with the same instrument." Kaelin turned to Soriel. His eyes held a question he did not need to voice. "Go," she said. "I will hold the wall." He kissed her forehead. Then he stepped off the battlement. The fall was 40 feet. Kaelin simply landed, bare feet hitting frozen ground, cracks radiating outward like roots. He straightened, unharmed, and walked toward his brother. On the wall, Soriel turned to the forces assembled at her back, 300 wolves and 11 Lycans, all looking to her because Kaelin had told the pack leaders 5 words the night before. My wife speaks for me. Tarvek. The mercenary flanks will break first, 3 Lycans on each side to cut off retreat. I want them surrounded, not scattered. Scattered soldiers become raiders. Surrounded soldiers become prisoners. Tarvek nodded and moved. Pack leaders, your wolves hold the center. Do not advance. Let them come to you. The wall funnels their numbers. Below, the brothers shifted simultaneously. 2 Lycans collided with a force that shattered the frozen ground beneath them. Mordaine's voidstone had bonded to his shifted form, extending from his foreleg like a claw of absolute darkness. His Lycan form was a nightmare mirror of Kaelin's, same immense proportions, but wrong. Fur the black of deep water. Eyes tarnished, filmed with something that pulsed with the same energy as the cursed blade. Mordaine's army charged the moment the brothers clashed. The first rank hit the funnel point and compressed, their numerical advantage becoming a liability as wolves trampled wolves trying to push through. Tarvek's Lycans struck the flanks like hammers on glass. Soriel coordinated from the wall, her healer's mind processing chaos with clinical precision, identifying pressure points, redirecting reinforcements, calling out vulnerabilities. She was not a warrior. She had never been a warrior. But she was a woman who had kept a dying house alive through plague and poverty, and those skills translated with devastating effectiveness. Below, the brothers fought with savage intensity. Kaelin was faster. Mordaine was more vicious. The voidstone claw opened wounds that burned with cursed fire and did not heal, leaving black streaks across Kaelin's dark silver fur. But Kaelin fought with something Mordaine lacked. The focused clarity of a man fighting not for a throne, but for the woman on the wall, for the garden and the quiet mornings, for the right to choose peace. And the fury of that choice was more terrifying than any ambition. Mordaine landed a strike that opened Kaelin's flank from shoulder to hip, mirroring the original wound, the scar on his chest. Kaelin staggered, his Lycan form wavering. From the wall, Soriel felt it. Not through a bond, not through magic, but through something simpler and older, the gut-deep knowledge that the person she loved most in the world was being hurt. She shifted. Her silver-gray wolf leaped from the battlement without hesitation, covering impossible distance, landing between the brothers in the moment Mordaine raised his voidstone claw for the killing blow. She was not large enough to block it, not strong enough to deflect it, not fast enough to dodge it. But she was there. And Mordaine hesitated. 1 fraction of a second. An involuntary flinch at a small wolf appearing where he expected empty air. Not compassion, surprise. It was enough. Kaelin's jaws closed around Mordaine's voidstone foreleg and wrenched. The sound was catastrophic. Bone and cursed metal and the fabric of something unnatural tearing apart simultaneously. Mordaine's scream was not a wolf sound or a Lycan sound, but something rawer, the howl of a being whose corruption had been physically ripped from its body. The voidstone claw shattered. Without it, Mordaine's form destabilized. The tarnished gold of his eyes flickered, dimmed, and the darkness that had permeated his fur began to recede like a tide pulling from shore. He shrank, not shifting back to human, but diminishing, his power draining through the wound where the cursed weapon had bonded to his flesh. Kaelin released him and stood over his fallen brother. Blood poured from the wound in his flank. His eyes burned with pain and exhaustion and something that might have been grief. On the field around them, Mordaine's army collapsed. Without their leader's presence driving them forward, the mercenaries' fragile loyalty dissolved. Wolves threw down weapons. Turned humans sat on the frozen ground and waited, relieved that the compulsion to fight had evaporated. The battle was over. Soriel shifted back to human form and pressed her hands to Kaelin's wounded flank. The voidstone damage resisted her healing, cursed edges fighting her instinct to mend. But she was Soriel of House Stravain, the woman who had kept dying things alive through sheer relentless stubbornness. The black edges retreated. Clean flesh advanced. And Kalen, still in his Lycan form, lowered his massive head and pressed his nose to her cheek. The same gesture a husband might use to nuzzle his wife in the morning, half asleep, grateful for another day beside her. She laughed through her tears and wrapped her arms as far as they would reach around his enormous neck. "Do not ever do that to me again." A rumble through his chest. Not a growl. The Lycan equivalent of a laugh. Behind them, from the castle wall, a howl rose. Then another. Then hundreds. Wolves and Lycans together, their voices intertwining in a chorus not heard in living memory. A sound that said, in a language older than words, "We are one pack now." In the weeks that followed, Ashenmore transformed. Not overnight, and not without difficulty. But it transformed. Mordain was tried before a joint council of Wolfpack leaders and Lycan elders, the first such tribunal in recorded history. Stripped of his voidstone corruption, he was diminished in both power and presence. He was sentenced to permanent exile, his Lycan abilities sealed by binding runes. The symmetry, the same type of chains that had once held Kalen, was not lost on anyone. Halvard's fate was decided by his own people. Presented with the full scope of his conspiracy, the Wolfpacks voted unanimously to strip his alpha title. He chose service as a common border guard on the southern frontier. Soriel suspected it was calculation, not humility. Halvard was playing a long game. She did not fear him. She had stopped fearing Halvard the moment she watched him kneel on his own floor. Kalen did not claim the throne. He proposed shared governance, rotating leadership, consensus over dominance, no single alpha, no single king. A structure built on cooperation rather than submission. It will be slow. Tarvek warned him privately. It will be messy. Wolves and Lycans have never governed together. I know. But thrones are what created this mess. I would rather try something slower and messier than repeat the same cycle of power and corruption that nearly destroyed us all. Tarvek studied him for a long moment. You really would rather fix roofs, would you not? Yes, Kalen said, without hesitation. I genuinely would. House Stravain was restored, not to its former military glory, but to something better. Soriel reopened the manor as a healing house, a place where wolves, Lycans, and humans could come for treatment without judgment or hierarchy. The foxglove garden was expanded. The roof, finally, was properly repaired. Kalen worked alongside her every day. His Lycan nature was no longer hidden, and the gold in his eyes had become as familiar to Soriel as the gray had once been. But his hands were the same hands. His quiet steadiness was the same steadiness. The man she had married and the king he had remembered being had merged into someone who was both ancient power and garden dirt simplicity, sovereignty and kindness, in deliberate balance. On a warm evening 3 months after the battle, Soriel found Kalen sitting on the stone bench in the garden, the exact spot where she had found him bleeding. He was watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of copper and gold, and his expression held the particular contentment of someone who understood exactly where they were meant to be. She sat beside him. The council meeting ran long today, he said. It always runs long. That is the point of consensus. He smiled. Tarvek says I should just make decisions and tell everyone what to do. He says it would save 3 hours per session. Tarvek is a soldier. Soldiers like efficiency. You are building something that is supposed to outlast us both. That takes time. You sound like a queen. I sound like a woman who managed an estate budget of 14 coins and a sack of barley for 3 years. Governance is just resource management with more arguing. Kalen laughed. A real laugh, full and warm, the kind she had heard 1,000 times in their kitchen and their garden and their bed. the kind that still made her chest ache with the simple, staggering gratitude of having him beside her. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew something small, a pendant on a leather cord, dark metal, engraved with angular symbols. A new one, forged by the Lycan smiths, carrying the same inscriptions as the one Halvard's wolves had taken. In Lycan tradition, Kaelin said, a bonding pendant is given when two souls choose each other, not by fate, not by destiny, not by compulsion or magic. He held it out to her. By choice, freely made, with full knowledge of who and what the other person is. Soriel took the pendant. The metal was warm in her palm as though it had been waiting for her. You chose me when I was a broken stranger in your garden. You chose me when you thought I was human. You chose me when you learned I was a Lycan. You chose me when you broke my chains and kissed me in a cell. He paused. I am choosing you now, fully and completely, with every part of myself, if you will still have me. Soriel slipped the pendant over her head. The dark metal settled against her chest, warm and steady, like a second heartbeat. I have had you since you bled in my foxgloves, she said. The rest was just details. He kissed her in the garden where they had begun, with the sunset turning the mountains to gold around them, and the distant sound of wolves and lichens running together across the valley below, a sound not heard in generations. A sound that said, in a language older than thrones and borders and the petty divisions of frightened creatures, we are home. And in the years that followed, when travelers came to the healing house and asked about the woman with the silver wolf who ran the clinic, and the quiet man who tended the garden and somehow made everything he touched grow stronger, the people of Ashenmoor would smile. They would say, "That is the healer and her husband. She pulled him from the dirt, and he turned out to be a king. But he would rather fix your roof than rule the world, and she would rather brew your tea than sit on any throne." They chose each other. Simply, stubbornly, completely. And nothing, not conspiracy, not cruelty, not the darkest ambitions of wolves or kings, could ever take that choice away. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story.